So, for those watching here today, our guest today is one of the most in-demand composers in Hollywood, and no doubt much of his success is based on the rich diversity of his writing. I mean, comedy work, horror, thrillers, dramas, action, adventure for both TV and film. He's scored video games. He's done theme park music, and he is the youngest recipient of ASCAP's Henry Mancini Lifetime Achievement Award. And he's taken the time to chat with us. So please welcome Mr. John Debney.
What an amazing introduction. Thank you. I've done a few things in my life.
You've done a few things. Well, I guess first and foremost, how are you and your family holding up during the pandemic?
Good. Thank you. Being as many of you that are composers out there know, we sort of live a solitary life, don't we? And in terms of interacting with people, but I've been really lucky because it's been actually a busy year, but all virtually, really. We've been recording virtually. We've been doing meetings virtually, as I'm sure you guys have. And we're good. Thank you. We're surviving and everybody's healthy. And so we're very grateful for that.
Excellent.
I hope everybody out there is also same.
Well, yes, thank you for that. Well, there's so many aspects of your career. Obviously, today we want to keep it within the context of technology and that kind of thing. But of course, it's good to have a background on the work that you do, your creative process, the film work that you've done. So I guess, it'd be natural to start with some of your background a bit to talk about, growing up in the business, growing up in Los Angeles. And of course, your dad, well known with Disney and the work that he did. And, both of your parents were musical people. And then just the fact that you playing guitar as a primary instrument, and eventually going, to Cal Arts. But talk a little bit about that, because I know one of the most important aspects of your career is how the work that you did on the Disney lot early on.
Well, gee, thanks for that, Matt. Yeah, I grew up here in LA, which is kind of rare, I think, I'm told. And my dad worked at Walt Disney Studios for 40 years. I won't get into that, but he had a very long, rich career, knew Walt Disney. And, I grew up on that lot, really, excuse me. And once I started to play guitar at age 6, I started playing in bands. I grew up out in the SoCal environment and played in all kinds of top 40 bands, and then got into school and decided around my sophomore year of college that I wanted to concentrate on composition. So went to Cal Arts, got a degree there, and got out and started to freelance. And I was an orchestrator, really quick history. I was an orchestrator for many years for many working composers. And I was grateful for that because it gave me quite a nice, I think, a good training ground in terms of orchestration. And then I started to get my own episodes of TV shows, lo and behold, God, around the late 80s, early 90s. And then that, excuse me, one thing led to another, and started to get some episodes. And then after I started doing TV for a long time, maybe about 10 years or so, I was lucky enough to land a couple of feature projects, and one of them being Hocus Pocus for Disney, again, having done a lot of work with Disney. So my journey really has been one of kind of slow growth, orchestrating, and then I'm just so grateful that I got to work in this business and still am, and love doing it still. And that's kind of where I'm at. And then I'm in my studio with DP in the background. I've got to do some fixes later.
I see. Today's good. I'm going with some fixes. That sounds good. So you're in Burbank, right?
Yep. I'm in Burbank.
Excellent. So you've got a beautiful room set up there. Well, like you said, so early on, I mean, you were doing a freelance work. Now, you spent some time with Mike Post, right? Were you part of his team at one point?
I worked for Mike Post. Yeah, I love Mike Post. Did a lot of work for him. I would say I would spend about 2.5, 3 years with Mike, and he sort of really gave me my start, to be honest with you. I was part of a team. Mike used to have teams of people working with him, and I was fortunate enough to be with Mike and sort of did that till I really started to get my own jobs and had to at that point, had to say goodbye regretfully, only because I love Mike. And
Mhm.
so that's really how I started. Yeah, I started doing television shows and Mike Post, and then one thing led to another.
One thing led to another. Well,
Yeah.
it's funny to come out of the gate with a pretty heavy question in a way, but not a bad way to segue is talk about music scoring. You're again playing in bands and having a guitar background, studying composition, working under these composers. How would you say that when you think about what you see when you get a film and you see visual, you see dialogue, sound effects, how in your mind, how do you translate music? How does it come to you? What's that process for you?
Wow, great question. It's really mysterious to me, Matt. I know that's sort of a cop-out answer, but um, you know, I'm just one of those people, and I think a lot of us out there have different abilities. And for some reason, when I see something or read a script or see a scene or start watching something, ideas come to me. And I always tell people it's sort of like if you have a well, like with water in a water well,
Mhm.
and you put the bucket and it goes down the well, and then you pull the bucket up, and there are ideas. So I don't know how or why. I think they just come out of the air or from up above or from somewhere.
Mhm.
And that's sort of how it starts for me. Some things come quickly, some things don't. Some things are sort of a lot of trial and error, sitting over there and banging out melodies, because I always start with a melody to nuts and bolts of it. I always try to start with some kind of a melody or motif that sort of speaks to me or speaks to the characters, and that's kind of how I do it. I know that all sounds kind of uh it's mysterious. I don't know. I don't
No, I
know.
think it's very hard to articulate, but like you said, for whatever reason, well, it's interesting because if you think about the craft of scoring in a way, you learn, you let the tonalities and stuff, but then it's just the experience of knowing kind of what fits. I assume that after years of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all develop our bag of tricks. You know, I talked about this many years ago because I noticed it in myself. I noticed that I don't really have a style. I look at people that I admire, like Danny Elfman. They're Tom Newman. There are certain people that just have a style. I
Mhm.
think I'm more of sort of a chameleon, and I'm quite comfortable with that. I like that. Meaning, if I'm asked to do a country score, or I'm asked to do a romantic comedy, or
Mhm.
what have you, I kind of like the challenge of doing different types of things, and that I guess gives me juice, to try things, and I don't know. It's just the way my mind works, and I love to multitask. So sometimes the best things for me are doing two projects at once, and then both being really different, and one then feeds the other.
Oh,
I don't know, all
interesting.
that crazy mental those mental gymnastics that I guess we all have to do to get it
You
out.
turn your mind though, but then when you come back, there's a freshness to going back and forth, and you can sort of compartmentalize those. That's really interesting. Well, talking about technology for a minute, John. So, the technical and mechanical aspects of computers, of course, for recording and editing scores and stuff. But to what extent is the computer a creative force? Like, in other words, you're sitting down and you don't have a musical idea in your head, and you're just using the technology to create.
Well, great question, especially since we're talking about our favorite software, DP. I've been a DP user since the very beginning. I think you know that, Matt.
Mhm.
And initially, quite a number of years ago, I would always sit at the piano and try to write something down, pencil and paper. And then about 1997, I guess it was, I started to transition into writing really on the computer and into MOTU. So DP became it, and it has become my writing partner. Really, I write exclusively in that. And behind you, you'll see I always have DP running. Sometimes I'll have Ableton running, and then I have the picture and what have you, and the soft synths all
Mhm.
there. Um, but DP has become a real writing tool. And Matt, you and I have spoken about this before. And what I mean by that, DP, I craft each piece of music in DP, and I therefore create the tempi. I create rallentandos, excels. I create, and it all has to be musical to me. So I don't get into necessarily esoterics of what DP does, but I craft the cue inside of DP. So as I write, I craft it, and then I, just because of experience, I know, gosh, right here, I want to do a little bit of a retard, getting me to hear, and so I create it. And what that does for me, it enables me to do, and I do it about 90% of the time, by the way. It enables me to do numerous takes of the same piece, but they're always perfectly in sync. I think that hopefully that makes sense.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
So, when you're doing free timing, or if I'm working with streamers in DP, it's a little bit different, but I build the click tracks all the time because it really saves me time on the stage, to be quite frank. And so DP has become that essential tool that I use. And again, I do my own mock-ups, so I'm sort of that crazy. I always liken myself to that little old guy in the corner that's a cobbler. Only works on one pair of shoes at a time. Anyway, that's kind of what I do, and it also saves me a lot of time. So I hope
it's critical, like you said, the clicks, creating that grid, creating that conductor track is such an essential part. And then, like you said, so not so much relying on those, lock marker calculators. Is it more of an intuition about, hey, this is going to speed up slightly here, and this is going to go to 3/4, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I do it for a reason. I do it because I want it to be playable. So many times I don't know, maybe certain composers do it a different way, but for instance, when I have to then, picture's always changing, as we know. So if I have to retime something, I need to retime it properly, so that usually I'm blessed. I get to work with orchestras, all the time, which is so wonderful. And so it needs to be very playable. It needs to be musical. It needs to, in my ear, sound like you're not playing to a click. Does that make sense? So,
Sure.
I want it to be so organic and so musical that you really don't know there's a click track going. And I get that question a lot. Do you use clicks? And I use them 90% of the time. But I craft them. I do sloping. I do all kinds of that stuff that we know that DP does so well. And so that's the nuts and bolts of sort of how I do it.
As an extension of that, John, since you conduct your scores, both live and in the studio. So I guess, creating the clicks, knowing that when you're on the stand, the way that you can get the players involved in such a way. I love the fact that you conduct as a part of, and talk about that for a minute, what that adds to the end result.
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. I do it both ways. I usually conduct, but sometimes if I have to be in the booth, if there's let's say a new person I'm working with, and maybe they're nervous or they need me to be in the booth, then I'll be in the booth and I'll hire somebody to conduct for me. But most of the time I conduct, and the reason is I get a better performance, to be quite frank. Since I've now built my clicks and it's all in the score exactly the way I want it, I can now impart what I want to the orchestra very, very easily. There are very little questions. One of the things that, and most of you that are composers out there, one of the things that kills you on a scoring stage is taking too much time and having too many questions. So I try to keep it to a minimum, and I've got such a great team, by the way, that it's kind of pretty much flawless. We've checked all the scores. There are no wrong notes. Sometimes there are wrong notes, but
sure.
We try to check everything ahead of time. So everything is there. And then, so when I'm on the stand conducting, it's an immediacy that I love. I already know the music very well now. So I already know when they need to come down, when they need to come up. I know I'm anticipating where they need to slow down. And so I'm, looking around the room. Really on the first read, that's what I do. When the first time, there's sort of a science to it. And if I'm going off track, then let me know.
Go.
But here you go.
Sure.
So the first time I read a piece of music of mine, or anybody's really, I'm analyzing it very deeply about, we go by bar 13, but I know bar 13 wasn't right, so I need to fix something. And we keep going, and then I know, there's a rallentando. And it's fun for me because the orchestra sometimes doesn't see it coming, even though it's marked. So I'll call it kind of, so our first read through is that. Our first read through is getting to know the roadmap, we call it. And then, we run through a piece, and then we talk about it. And then, the musicians know. So in other words, there's a shorthand that I do in DP to make sure that it's very playable. It's very logical, what it is I'm trying to achieve. And it makes it go that much faster, so that, when I'm looking up the clock, and again, all the composers out there know what that means. There's big clock on the scoring stage. And one of the most fun things for me is when there's a problem or there's a picture change and I have to fix something, and I'm always looking at the clock, and I kind of pride myself because it's like a race. It's like we're all racing to the finish line. I have to get done in time. So what I've done in DP allows me now to be completely confident about losing a couple beats here, doing this here. And so it's all prep, really. It's all preparation. If you don't do that, you can run into all kinds of problems on the scoring stage, about there's a picture change, you didn't know about it. And I've seen some composers, and I don't quite understand it, where there'll be a picture change or 3 or 4 or 8. And then I've seen it, and I don't like it. I don't agree with it. They'll try to make up time in each bar. So you end up sometimes you'll have a piece of music that is unplayable. You'll go from an 80 BPM for these bars, and then they might put a 45 BPM in a bar, and then go to 180 in the next bar. It's not playable.
Got it.
And then we have to do things in pieces. So I hope that makes sense. So
it does.
All the way through, I use DP as that writing tool that then enables me to make it musical. I hope that makes sense.
No, absolutely.
But that's why I conduct, because then there's an immediacy. I know what's coming up, and I can kind of forewarn everybody, and we can learn it together and very quickly. So
right. Oh, that makes perfect sense. Well, one thing, I guess, more about the sort of concept of music and scoring is, maybe since a lot of film composers obviously here watching today, strategies that you've learned over the years, I'd like you to chat about that, to respect the temp music, but to sort of also start creating your own voice, like, strategies for navigating the temp and then kind of spinning off of it.
Wow. Well, we know that's a big subject. The hardest thing for me, I'm going to answer the question. The hardest thing for me has been when someone temps my music into something else, and I'm now doing that other thing. And then you're forced with this situation where you're like, that's going to be hard to beat, because that was something I did for something else that was a very specific thing. So that's the hardest thing for me. But having said that, if a temp is well done, I think it's a good tool. To me, I don't get bumped by temps at all. If they're well done, it helps me understand what's in the director's mind, he or she. So I use it. Now, if it's not so well done, and I think it's just hurting the movie, then I'll try to go another way. And sometimes it'll come up in our discussion with the director. I'll ask them, well, do you like this piece of music? And invariably, if it's not really working, invariably they'll say, well, no, I'm not wild about this. So that starts the discussion. I'm not terribly bumped by it. Now, if they're temping with John Williams or Jerry Goldsmith, that's a challenge, and that's a high bar, especially if the budget is such that we can't duplicate something like Star Wars with 20 musicians. And so it's a nuanced discussion. Does that, in other words,
Oh, absolutely.
There's no right or wrong, good or bad. It's just kind of informational. And a lot of times, again, there'll be times when I've written something a few times to a certain scene, and they keep saying, well, the temp and temp love and all that. And, then invariably, sometimes you just have to kind of copy it, but do your own version. Hopefully it's not too close. But there you go. We're there to serve the film, and we're there to make the director happy. And that's kind of all that matters, really.
That's a good point. Well, and also I think about some of the relationships you have with certain directors where obviously there's a trust that happens over the relationship where you might go in a little bit of a different direction, but then you can sort of make that argument because I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. You can make the argument, but every time out it's different for me. People like Gary Marshall, who we dearly miss and loved. I did like 7 films with him, and they're all a little different. So it's not always, there's a trust factor, like with Jon Favreau, there's a trust factor, but every film I've done with John is different. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you've worked with a director that he or she is going to let you go hog wild, as it were. It's all about that. It's all about making sure that you develop a relationship of trust, or just being a likable person. I'm a big believer. I'm a people person. So when I sit down with the director for the first time, this may be a little off subject, but I try to sort of get to know them a little bit and see if there's some kind of connection. And if there's some kind of connection through the material, then I think that's 50% of the whole thing.
Wow.
You may go down, I've many times gone down a path or a road writing, a score, and maybe it's not the right road or path. And that becomes apparent over time. And it's just through discussion. I work with Mel Gibson I worked with him on The Passion of Christ, and he's like a brother to me, sort of. And yet, there was a picture we did together, and I was going a certain way, and he didn't think that was the right way, and we kind of parted companies, and that's okay. We still hopefully we'll work together again, and we're friends. So I think that's really important, and maybe we're opening up that discussion of how you, as a composer, don't get your heart broken too much, but yet still get the job done and still create relationships that hopefully will last.
Right. Well, as a part of that, which actually comes to mind, John, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. This sort of ongoing discussion with composers about the evolution of film scoring. Like, in other words, we had Mark Shaman on the other day, and he was saying, he was grateful that when he started, the melodic thematic approach was more kind of, in vogue. And so are scores becoming less melodic, or what's your take on it?
Oh, first of all, I love Mark Isham. He's a friend of mine. Man, what a talent.
Actually it was Mark Shaman, who's also obviously equally great.
Equally great, wonderful guy. I love him. He cracks me up. He's so that's, I think melody's coming back. I have to be honest. The last few scores I've done have been terribly melodic. And so I'm not, I think for a while there was probably that, that sort of pendulum that swung over to more ambient, transparent, non-melodic. And that works great too. A lot of television, and some of the stuff I've been doing in television too, tends to be a little more of that. But a lot of the scores I've done, I did a film called Jingle Jangle that was really melodic. And this is all last year, and I did something called Come Away, which was terribly melodic and romantic, and
Hmm.
so I think there's a desire for it. It's hard to say, put a percentage on that, but I come from a melody sensibility, so I can't help it. That's just who I am. So, and there may be times when that's not appropriate, but that comes out in our discussion. A lot of times filmmakers might say, yeah, it's a little bit on the nose, and usually I know what that means. It might be a little bit too melodic or too something, too romantic, and so then there are those words and phrases that you learn that, oh, okay, maybe they want a little more ambient, transparent thing. And I don't know if there's anything right or wrong, but I love Mark Shaman. Boy, is he the king of melody. um, I love melody, so that's where I come from.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you can't change paths in the middle,
So yeah, that's encouraging in a way, because I think that there's this thought about sort of the lack of melody, but like you said, depends on the film, depends on the directors, and like you said, maybe it's like a pendulum. It's sort of things kind of come and go. But
well, I'd add to that, Matt. It's not easy writing a melody, and it's. And I'm not saying I'm not an expert. I try my best, but writing a good melody is hard, and there aren't that many composers that do it really well. There are a lot of them that do it well. I'm not saying I'm one of them, but it's a hard thing. And sometimes not writing melody is a lot easier than trying to come up with a great melody. So,
right.
Who knows?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, so in other words, you were saying, will you ever just sit in front of DP and just have an idea, and now you're browsing sounds in your template, and you're just kind of thinking about, hey, what would it sound like with these kinds of things? And you're just and talk a little bit about that, your current setup, maybe a little bit about your template and that kind of thing, where you can reach for different articulations and sounds.
Sure. Well, you know this about me, Matt. I am not the most sophisticated DP person in terms of using all the various functions. When I'm creating a piece, I'm literally just writing the volume as I go, because I'm an orchestrator by trade. So I know what the instrument should sound like, or what they will sound like. So I don't go in, and I know a lot of people go into the edit page and do the volume graphs.
Right.
I just create it as I'm going, and a lot of times I'll go back if it's not quite right, and I'll adjust it. But I'm not too sophisticated, so I do use a lot of features in DP. I bring in audio. I do a lot of audio, and I bring it in DP, or I'll commit it to audio.
Right.
And then put effects and things on it and whatever I need. But I'm not that sophisticated going into the notes and create. I'll usually fix it in the event list, which is really old school.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Bring up the event.
Absolutely.
No, just fix it.
Fix it.
But I have all the tools that we all have. All the soft synths are available. I've got a big palette, and it's a little hard for you guys to see, but I literally, because I work on sometimes many things at once, I have a massive palette that I have to scroll down, but everything's organized, and it's organized really in score kind of, it's woodwinds at top.
I see.
Strings next. Well, actually, woodwinds at top. I have strings next because I usually start writing with strings, then brass, and then everything else below it, pianos, harps, celeste, percussion. And then at the very bottom, I have some soft synths just that are, I always have Hans's stuff loaded.
Sure.
And all the above. And then, excuse me, to the left, I usually have my rack of all the soft synths, and I'll pop in things as I need them.
I see.
But in the main, I have a sort of a set template, and that again enables me to get around really quickly which is essential for me. It's
Mm.
essential for me.
So the template more or less kind of something that is consistent between different projects, whether TV or film, or do you sort of modify templates for per projects?
Well, I modify them as needed. You know, if I need guitars, I'll pull in some guitars. If I need whatever I need, I'll pull it in. But it does, it's project specific, but yeah, it's basically a template that always stays there. And now the great thing is now I'm down to one computer. You know,
Wow.
we have everything in there, and I have a portable rig on the laptop, which is pretty much a mirror rig of you know what I have. So it's getting better and better, isn't it? In terms of
Wow. So you've got the little rig. Do you actually take anything with you to the actual, the sessions, or do you use everything done in advance?
great question. In the old days, I would bring a rig with me, and then as I needed to make changes, I could do that on a break. But literally now everything is pre-laid, so I use just about everything that I write with. I bring all that to the stage. So not that we use it all the time, but French horns, we usually use a little of that with the real horns. This is getting a little nuts and boltsy, but the strings I'll usually use, the short strings with the real strings, and sometimes we'll use the long strings with the real strings. It just depends. So everything's pre-laid into Pro Tools, and the click now. By the way, the click is always from DP.
Mm-hmm.
We learned over the years that a lot of times we'd have sync problems because DP is so accurate. We would sometimes, mistakes were made in terms of, and we learned that the Pro Tools clicks and DP clicks aren't necessarily frame accurate to each other. Does that make sense?
Sure, absolutely.
If you're writing in Pro Tools, I'm sure it's frame accurate, but if you're writing in DP and you're just exporting that to Pro Tools, they don't always line up perfectly. And
Right.
over the last few years, we've learned that. And we actually sit there, it's really boring, but we'll have Pro Tools on the left click and DP on the right, and the clicks are going, and sure enough, they drift. And don't ask me why. I know there's an answer for that, and you would know that, Matt. But
So
anyway,
DP's driving essentially. It's the master in terms of the clicks, obviously. And so
DP is driving. Yeah,
it's
DP
driving.
is it. Yeah.
So just in the interest for our people watching here, in other words, everything's set up in your system where all of the outputs are going and being routed into Pro Tools where you can monitor, and not only monitor, but you can print. Now, is that really kind of an extension of, having deadlines and things, especially for TV? Is that a question of speed, or is that just the way you've always worked, where you come out and monitor and print to Pro Tools?
We've pretty much worked that way for a long time, like many years now, just for that reason that really Pro Tools is almost a monitoring thing for me, as opposed to, a lot of my friends write in Pro Tools and it works very well for them. But for me, yeah, it's just a way we have everything. I have great technical people, assistants that have over the years made it so that it's all routed a certain way so that they can really hit record in Pro Tools and go,
Right. So it doesn't take long to do the takedowns, to do those stems. That doesn't take long.
It's quicker than it used to be, for sure. But it's a whole process. I don't know if everybody works this way, but once I get an approval on a cue, then I'll send that to our copyists. They will then generate the MIDI sketch, and then concurrent with that, my guy Peace will come here and start to prelay, and that's how it goes. Usually, about a week before we get on a stage, or if we're going to London, at least a week, so we can send it to London. They can have a check on it, and that's really how we go.
So for the copyist, are you sending the DP project, or are you sending standard MIDI files or XML files?
No, DP.
DP. Excellent. So they have that.
They are so facile. They can do anything. Any of the platforms that you're working with, they do, and they're so good. I literally just I resave the DP file and then send a mix separately as audio. So they have the DP file and it comes up, and then they have the mix, and they literally just clean it up, fix all the, they have to do a bit of fixing, of course, and it doesn't all translate perfectly, as we know. So, but they're so adept at Joanne Kane Music Service. They're just
Wow. Well, so do you haven't, obviously you're playing in these parts, so you're not necessarily always quantizing. It's more of a question of feel and sound. And then they may need to get it more accurate.
Actually, I'm quantizing a lot. And
I'll
tell you why. All the libraries, as we know, some of them speak differently. And there's later, there's latency. So especially the strings, with my short strings, I have to nudge them a little bit in DP. I use that. It's not nudge feature. What is it? Shift. The shift.
Sure. Yep.
So I do that all the time, and because I'm a real, being locked and perfectly in sync is a big deal to me. Remember, I'm a rhythm guy. I'm a guitar player by training. And there's nothing worse, boy, in the old days, if we would get stems from, if I'm working with a programmer or he or she, you'd get stems, and then you'd have to line them all up, and some of the times it wouldn't line up. And some of the times I'd get to the scoring stage and they weren't lining up. That's not good. So it's kind of flawless now, but we're very careful. And let's say my process is, once I finish the score and now everything's in Pro Tools, we'll sit in my room and I'll go through every piece with a score with my Pro Tools operator. And we sometimes shift things, on the day we check. I mean, literally, sometimes I'm moving so fast that I'm not really able to, or I miss something, or I'm not able to shift stuff. So we fix it. We fix it all before we get to the stage. And I can't stress that more highly for everybody listening out there. As a composer, I would highly recommend you never get to the stage and you find things that are out of sync. That kills you. Right. So it's really kind of can be drudgery.
Sure.
But we listen to the click very loudly and make sure everything's perfect set.
Well, John, are you playing any guitar on your scores these days?
Yeah, I'm playing a lot of guitar on my
Fantastic.
scores.
Now, so let's talk a little bit about that. And are you tracking the guitar into DP or into Pro Tools?
Into DP.
Into DP.
I go straight in. I have everything behind me. I have everything wired, directly into DP. So it goes right into the audio buses, and I record directly in. And guitar is one of those things that kind of sucks MIDI wise, right? So I use it as a tool to get it down.
But I see your point with just all the nuance and
yeah, especially if I'm playing a melody or something. I always go to the real guitar for that. But yeah, I use a lot of audio in MOTU in DP.
Fantastic. That's cool. So do you track typically with the tone dialed in, or do you use plugins or a combination?
Both. Mostly plugins. I'll guitar rig or, and just do that, or a little bit of, all the effects that we have at our fingertips. A little reverb, a little, proverb or something. But yeah, I do it a lot.
That's great.
It's about 50-50. So if it's a MIDI guitar that I just needed playing in the background, it's kind of going with something, then I'll do that MIDI because it's just easier.
Got it. So then, I assume is your facility set up to do, having singers or, solo cello players and stuff like that to track on site? We
are. I have a little tracking room right here, which you can't see, but it's big enough to put one or two people in. And the cool thing about my facility is when we built it, even in our hallway, we have panels so in my lounge where we eat lunch, it has panel. And we've done drums out there.
Oh, nice.
So we've done a lot of projects where I'll have a couple of horn players in the booth. Then in the little in our little lock. It was a little locker room right as I go out the door. I'll put somebody in there and then can put somebody in another writing room I have and put somebody out in the lobby. So
That's great.
we have a lot of flexibility doing whatever we need to do.
But then mixing, is that something you would necessarily probably do at an actual mixing facility, or do you actually do final mixes there?
We've done final mixes here, but I have to rent a lot of gear, and we're just not that set up. I really haven't had the desire to be set up to do like a big 5-1-7-1. We've done it. I mixed Iron Man 2 here. I did a lot of stuff here, but it's a little bit of a, mixed rooms are different than writing rooms, at least for me. So this is really mainly a writing room and a presentation room is what this is.
I see. Well, that's great, playing on the scores and everything. And then, so, in DP, we're talking about clicks and things like that. What about like using chunks for either doing alternate versions or doing separate cues? Do you use chunks or do you use separate projects?
Yeah, I know a lot of people that use chunks. I don't. It seems like I should, but I just, call me crazy. There are a lot of issues with that. For instance, one reason I don't use chunks is because when I'm sending files to the copyist, I want that individual file to be 1M2 or 1M3, and that's it. I'm also a bar 1 guy, and I know a lot of my friends are bar 3 people because of MIDI and all that. I don't like it. I like to see the start of music at bar 1, and I've always been that way. So we've kind of engineered my setup so that I can go right in at bar 1, and it's pretty flawless. Sometimes I have to fix some volumes at the beginning, into bar 1. But anyway, that's a little bit, esoteric. But yeah, I utilize I just bar 1 because I'm an orchestrator. It's weird seeing bar 5 as the start of music.
Sure.
Anyway, so
No, it's nice. You said there's bar 1. That's the music, right?
that's just,
Makes
there's no
sense.
right or wrong.
So which windows do you kind of find yourself in the most often? Are you in QuickScribe fairly often?
I'm not in QuickScribe. I'm just on the main.
In the tracks window mostly. Got it.
Yeah, tracks window most of the time.
Well, that's great.
And then event list, just because it's easy for me to fix something quickly. And again, I don't do a lot of editing in the graph. I don't know why.
So not penciling so much, but it sounds like what you're actually playing in things from. Do you use like mod or controllers to actually massage in shape?
Oh yeah, real time. Real time. I don't give you just an idea. When I first start, I usually start with a big patch of string, like a full patch of strings, and kind of play it in, and then create volumes. Usually I'll play it in, and then I'll go back and create the volumes, and then that's done. And then I'll go in the next track, and that's really how I do it. And it just works for me. I don't have separate basses and cello and violas and violins. It's just that takes too long for me, because I think more globally, and that's kind of what I do. So I don't, but I have separates. I have separate high shorts and low shorts and all that we all have. But I always usually start out with some kind of multi-patch of something, just to get the idea.
Just to be able to sketch it out and have this big
sketch it out.
Got it.
A lot of times I'll sketch it out because I'm on a deadline, as we always are, and I'll sketch something out. I'll have to do a certain allotment per day, and then I'll come back the next morning and maybe fill it out. If it's a big cue, that helps me. That helps my mind, because I can get through a 5-minute cue doing that. Then just the filling out of it all, the orchestration of it all, takes a long time too. So, and I do it all. So that's why sometimes a lot of times I'll just kind of sketch it and then go back and fill it in.
I think it's great that you not only play in parts and play in your own MIDI, but you're doing your own mockups. Even with the deadlines and the projects that you carry, you're able to take the time to create those demos. That's great.
Well, or I'm crazy. I don't know what.
You know,
I've never had. I mean, I bring in people if I need them. You know, if it gets a
sure.
real crazy crunchy deadline, I'll bring people
Hmm.
in. Some really fine people, but I don't really have people here as a normal part of my writing where somebody in the next room is filling something out. Now, maybe I should do that. I don't know.
That's interesting. Well, like you said, and you
Oh,
managed it so far. I mean, well, you know, so what about these days doing either purely electronic scores, like sort of in the box in DP? How often does that happen? And or hybrid scores where it's going to be fairly electronic and loop oriented stuff, and then you're going to go do a date on the stage.
it happens a lot. To answer your question, Matt, about hybrid scores, you know, I dabble in, I love electronics. I'm not
Mhm.
an expert. Um, I dabble in that. And when I get a chance to write kind of some hybrid scores or all electronic scores, it's really fun.
Oh,
It's just, it's hard. I think that's harder for me.
interesting.
I've done a number of scores where or TV things where it's in the main electronics or all electronics. And it's harder for me. You remember, I'm generational. So, you know, I was pencil and paper
Sure.
person. And you know, a rock and roll guitar player that went to college and got his degree in composition, studying, you know, classical composition. So
Sure.
I can navigate both worlds pretty well, but I think that really I think that what I'm most comfortable with are more orchestral things. But I
Right.
do both. I do them
You do
both.
both. Yeah, absolutely.
In the case of a hybrid score, a lot of times I'll have Ableton running, you know, as slaving to performer, and everything's in sync. And Ableton's just great. I've got this massive, as I guess we all do, massive library of everything in Ableton. So that's kind of fun to work with that.
Got it. That's great that you have, like you said, being able to do all those different types of scores. Well, and you know how great these days to have a live orchestra. You know, thank goodness for Seth MacFarlane and wanting to have to pay for players. This is great.
Ah, love the guy. Yeah, we do a show called The Orville,
Hmm.
and it's been such an honor to be a part of that because, well, number one, it's just so fun. Uh, you know, every week we go in, and COVID kind of stopped all that, but we're going to be getting back to that
Oh,
soon,
good.
actually. Um, but you know, being able to write for a 90-piece orchestra every week,
Every
it's
week. By the way, are you sleeping much?
unheard of. It's you know,
Wow.
that's Seth. Seth is just, you know, a great musician and a great lover of orchestral music. So myself and Joel McNeely, just to name another friend of mine,
Right.
get to go in there and play in that sandbox, and it's unbelievable,
That
really.
is amazing. I mean, the fact that you're writing all that orchestra music for that great show. Well, you know, it's funny. I was looking through, you know, your IMDb and just some of the great films. You know, it's funny. Every year, everyone on I'm sure everyone here watches Elf at least once every year. You have to watch, you know, It's a Wonderful Life, and you have to watch Elf at least once a year.
I
And
hope
then,
so. That's great. Thank you.
oh, and then of course the Bruce Almighty films were great. And then you know, for me too, The Greatest Showman, Jungle Book.
Oh,
Some great
fun.
scores. Beautiful scores. Which ones so far? I imagine you can't. You know, it's like picking your kids, right? But there's certain scores that in your mind kind of were really magical moments that you.
Oh, there's so many of them. That's a hard question to answer. First of all, you know, I'm the luckiest guy on the planet to have worked in this business and still get called to do things. And um, that's a hard one. I have special ones that stand out, like Jungle Book stands out. That was
Sure.
really a wonderful, you know, my collaboration with John Favreau has been nothing short of extraordinary for me. And Jungle Book was also kind of the culmination of a long journey of Disney history.
Good point.
So they're all little wonderful children of mine. You know, when I look early in my career, those were special because I didn't know what I was doing. No, I just kidding. You know, things like Hocus Pocus when I did
Sure.
that for Disney.
Hmm.
really my first film score, big film score.
Hmm.
Things like Cutthroat Island, being a young guy
Hmm.
in my 30s, writing for a 110-piece orchestra and 80 choir. I don't know. It's just
That's
insane.
great.
It's really insane. And, I'm so grateful. It's literally, it's hard to even process some of the stuff that I've been lucky enough to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do you ever have, I suppose you're so busy that you wouldn't have time for any sort of personal musical projects, or do you? Is there anything that you have in the
Oh, God, that's a great question. It's rare because I'm usually working on something,
Mhm.
that has a deadline. But I did get to do, and I'm so happy to say we did a musical. I did a musical a couple of years ago called My Silent Night,
Hmm.
and we premiered it in Salzburg, Austria, of all places. And it was a great success. And the songs are very tuneful, very melodic.
Mhm.
And God, it was a joy. It was really hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I think I wanted to quit about 5 times
Wow.
because it's a different animal. But and I've done things like I did the Passion Oratorio, which was sort of based on my score for the Passion
Right.
of the Christ, and that's been fun. And we performed that. We performed it a number of times, and it's been performed all over the world, in places and at times. It's kind of rare because I'm always on a deadline. I'm always
Right.
thankfully employed. So
You're always working. Well, let me
yeah,
ask you this, John. When you do those live performances, like let's say for the Passion of the Christ, do you
yeah.
ever do you have pre-records where streamers and clicks and things like that, or is it all live?
Um, that's a good question. The Passion Oratorio is completely live.
Got it.
It's meant to be, and we're going to hopefully do live to picture. If COVID
Sure.
lets us, we're going to do live to picture the Passion of the Christ to the
Hmm.
film
Hmm.
probably next year.
Great.
Yeah, we're almost at Easter. Yeah, next year. So that will be clicks and streamers because it has to be. It has to be in sync
Right.
and but yeah, the fun thing about the oratorio is just you can have at it, and there's nothing really. Although we do have visuals, so there is sort of a sync thing, but it's a loose sync. So anyway,
Well, we're gonna, if it's okay with you, segue into some Q&A for our guests.
sure, yeah,
Well, but just to kind of recap, since we've kind of bridged into DP here and there, I mean, I guess in a nutshell, it's obviously a very important part of what you do. It's integrated into your daily workflow. And it seems to me that find, I think in a way it's funny, there's a lot of obviously very popular DAWs these days, or people say, it's sort of a religious thing. Like, which DAW do you use? But
yeah.
I find that to be, maybe you could talk about this, but I think DP is a very musical program that kind of, even if you're in a technical capacity, it's not a huge departure from musical thinking. Is that a true statement?
Oh well, I absolutely agree with that. Now, mind you, I made a decision a long time ago to not switch. DP always has worked great for me, and I'm just I'm of an age I don't want to jump over to Logic or something else. So I'm I'm very much at home with DP, and I will say that it is always uh, enabled me to do the music, do my music the way I want to do it. So it's it is a musical thing. I literally, it's such an extension of me, and it's so transparent that um, I think I described it to you. It is a composing tool. Um, it enables me to experiment, to try different things, to change tempi and bring in audio and
Hmm.
futz with that and just have fun. So it's enabled me to do everything that I wanted to do. Like every program, there are things that I've just learned that I need to there are quirky things that I need to
Sure.
do. There aren't that many of them anymore. I remember in the old other versions, we had
Hmm.
more of those, but it's just, I can't say enough about it. And again, I know if you had people on that use other platforms, they would rave about them, but I'm a DP person and that's what I use and I love it. So why change?
Well, that's great. Well, we're proud of, the work that you do. And, it'd be fun to sit next to you at some point and watch you work. It's always neat to see people run these tools. Everybody has sort of their different approach, even though,
Yeah.
it's the program's been out for such a long time. Everybody has sort of their own unique take on it. But, well, that's great, John. Thank you for.
You might be bored. You might be bored sitting in my room.
No. Well,
I'll work on. I will literally, Matt, work on it. Whatever I'm doing. Like there might be 4 bars that I work on all day long, and I'm just and then I'll change it the next day because it's usually better the next day.
The 4-bar day, that's good, and then the next day you'll crank on. That's good.
Yeah, those are not good days if it's 4-bar day.
That's funny. Well, it's interesting. Real quick, John. When you were talking about the guy that you had worked with, Buddy, right back in the Disney days. It's interesting. Real quick, I was thinking about that when asking you a question. How there's the romantic notion of the film composer, and then there's the work, right? And I love the imagery of Buddy going to work. He's like he's going to write music that day, rain or shine. He's going to work.
Well, if I can impart anything to any newer composers out there that might be listening or watching, man, that discipline thing, you have to do that. You have to learn that. And the story that I love to tell that I think you're referring to, Matt, is when I was working at Disney right out of college as a young guy, doing everything, doing a little copying, doing whatever, taking scripts over to John Barry's house or whatever.
Great.
One of the things I gleaned very quickly in one of my first big lessons in my professional life was to see this man, Buddy Baker, who's a legendary composer at Disney, come in every day, suit and tie, and he'd come in at like 8 a.m. I don't know, something, very early, pretty early. And at the beginning of the day, there'd be a little stack of score sheets, sketch sheets.
Mm-hmm.
And he would sit at the piano. No, I mean, this is 35 years. I mean, it's a long time ago. And no, there was nothing. There was barely a synthesizer there. It was a CS80 or something.
Sure.
Anyway, long story short, I would, he would start here in the morning, and when he'd leave at 5 p.m. sharp, I'd peek in his room, and he'd have stacked like that. And he'd go to lunch and do, have breaks and all that. And so I really, my years there at Disney, starting out, I developed this discipline thing. And to this day, I do that because I don't like sitting, this may be bad to say, I don't like sitting at this computer all day long. I really don't. In fact, I kind of hate it. But I love creating music. And so I've learned now over the years to get to it. And I try to come in at a reasonable time in the morning. I try to leave by, if I'm lucky, 5 or 6. Now, there are nights where I have to stay much later.
Sure.
But, my friend Hans comes in late and he stays in 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning. I can't do that. I'm not that person.
I get it.
I have a life. Sorry, Hans. I love you. I love you. You know what I mean? So
absolutely.
I've got a wonderful family and beautiful kids and a couple of grandkids. And I like to enjoy an incredible wife. I like to enjoy life. Yeah. So I've learned that. And that's a huge lesson that I hope those of you that are starting out, if you can force yourself. I used to get that question, well, when do you, if you're not inspired one day, how do you get into inspiration? And I always laugh. I go, oh, I don't wait for inspiration. I have to create. I have to do. I'm on a deadline. So if I have to write 5 minutes a day, I write 5 minutes a day. It may not be the best 5 minutes, but I write it, and I can go back and fix it. But I don't wait for inspiration. My God, I wouldn't have a career.
Wow. Well, I'm really glad that you actually went into that. That's fantastic. So if you don't mind, Adam, let's start with the questions and let's get into it.
Sounds good. Thanks for your time, John.
Oh, thanks, Adam.
So I have a list of questions that I've pulled from the chat that folks have thrown in there. You may have already touched on some of these, but
sure.
Here's what I've caught up with. Do you have an orchestrator like Danny Elfman and his team, and what's involved in the relationship?
Oh gosh, certainly. Yes. I've had a number of great ones over the years. Brad Dector was working with me for many years. He still works with me. I still work with everyone. Nowadays there are more teams. Mark Graham, who's incredible, great orchestrator, great friend of mine. He's sort of runs Joanne Kane Music Service. So these days, I just sort of filter everything I do through Mark and his team, and they're amazing. So they pull in people as needed. And there are, I'll mention a few great ones. Kevin Koska I worked with for years, Jeff Edmagian, Pete Anthony. Some of you might know some of these names. They're all great. They're all friends of mine. Conrad Pope. I mean, there's so many great ones out there. Lolita Ritmanis is a great composer, orchestrator. So yeah, I've just been blessed. I have a lot of those types in my life that make me look good. Yeah.
Well, and the other half of that being what's involved in the relationship. What would you say to that part of it?
Trust. You have to have complete trust. You have to. I'll back up. When I was an orchestrator, when I would work for other people, I learned from a great orchestrator at Disney by the name of Walter Sheets. And one of the things I learned, and I learned this with Mike Post and all these guys that I worked with, the orchestrator's job is to make the composer look and sound as good as they can sound. That's all that they should do. And if that means voicing a chord differently or whatever, then there's a discussion that should happen. You don't want to surprise a composer, but by the same token, if you have great ones working for you, like some of the names I mentioned, a lot of times I can just say, fill this out and make it big, add whatever you'd like to add. And they'll do that. But that is the main, the orchestrator, he or she, that's their job. They need to be there, but not be seen. I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, they can be there, but it's all about making the music sound as good as it can sound. And that's the job of a great orchestrator. And the great ones know that, by the way. And there's great joy and I don't know what the right word would be. There's when you're orchestrating for someone and you hear it and it's sounding amazing, that's the payoff, that's the gig. So it has to start with trust. And and then if you are lucky like me to have worked with them over the years, many of them, it's sort of flawless. Pete Anthony, I'll tell you one quick story. Pete Anthony I love, and I mean, he might be the dean of the modern day orchestrator, sort of. Pete and I always used to talk about a red light person. What that means is he or she, like we'd talk about different orchestrators and he'd go, oh, well, she's a red light person. And I go, what? And many years ago, I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, the red light orchestrator is the one that you've got 2 minutes left in the session and you just go. You don't have to rehearse it. You just record and it's perfect. That's a red light person. And there are not that many of them, but when you find one, you got to hold on to them because they're the good ones.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Are there specific libraries you use to emulate an orchestra that are best for you?
Oh my gosh. No, I use them all and I'm always on the hunt for the newest and great. I mean, we all use Spitfire. Spitfire's, wow, I love those guys. It seems like every week there's some new wonderful library that they're doing. Because I know what the orchestra should sound like, it's maybe a little bit easier for me to work with the libraries and tweak them just a little bit or whatever I need to do to make them sound real. It's sort of an art. James Newton Howard years ago, James always had the best sounding demos that I'd ever heard. And he was he's a big synclav guy back in the day. And I asked him a couple times, I could just, James, and James, similarly, James knows what real instruments should sound like. So we have a very similar approach that he and I sort of write for the instruments. I hope that makes sense. In other words, there might be a melody and I'm thinking it should be English horn. And then I realize, oh, it'd be better on a clarinet. And then, so we kind of do it that way. And James also has great sounding demos. I think my demos sound pretty good. Sometimes I'm fooled by how good my demos sound, because these days they use the demos in the preview scores a lot of times. And that's kind of cool. Sometimes I'm fooled, like, oh, is that? Oh yeah, that's one of the demos. So thankfully they've gotten that good because of all these great libraries that we all use. So
Absolutely.
there's nothing specific. I have certain libraries that I like for certain things,
What does Pro Tools bring that DP doesn't? We got a lot of diehard DP people in the room, so there's always they're ready to duke it out about that.
Oh God, there's no argument. Pro Tools does nothing that DP can do. No, I don't know that much about Pro Tools. It may sound silly. I just am not. I'm not Mr. Technical Wizard. I have a couple really good friends of mine that write in Pro Tools. Not interested for me. It's too much. I just want to write.
Great answer.
Well, and real quick, can I interject something?
Yeah, please.
Okay, John, I mean, look, he writes in Digital Performer, and obviously the studios and the scoring stages will use Pro Tools. And so remember, under deadlines, John is monitoring and printing so he can move things up the chain. It's not a question of whether a DAW is better or not. It's just a workflow thing.
It's a workflow thing. That's right.
Sounds good.
And I love Pro Tools for what Pro Tools does for me, which is everything ends up in Pro Tools. And we use it on the stage when we're mixing, sometimes 2 and 3 rigs, by the way, as you know, we'll have 2 and 3 Pro Tools rigs going at a time if it's a really big show, like an Iron Man or something that has, hundreds or thousands of tracks.
Wow.
To me, they serve 2 different purposes for me.
Sure. There's a lot of tech geeks in the room, so they're looking at your backdrop behind you and going, "Hey, can we get a studio tour? Can you give us a very brief rundown?"
Oh God, yeah, but it's really. I told Matt, it's so boring. All right, it's like you're gonna laugh. So, really quick, so I've got this incredible instrument called the Apprehension machine. And there's only 2 in the world. This is number 2, I believe. I think the guys that built them gave up after number 2. So this is cool. This is all mic'd up. We've got the erstwhile board, which, by the way, I don't use anymore. It's all direct now.
Got it.
And then here's something cool. All right. So you asked. Okay. So.
Hey, there's a program we know.
Yep. There's a program we know. And that's a show I'm working on.
Cool.
Little TV thing. And but this is so deep. So JD guitars. I don't know if you can see. Let me go a little closer.
Yeah. See the purple guitars there?
JD guitars, soft piano, Omni, whole bunches of stuff. This is all orc. They're just like, if you're moving really fast and I want to, do some big tutti things, I go there. Then strings. I'm just trying out a bunch of different types of strings. I'm never happy with the strings, by the way. I don't know if I hear these great demos and that people do, and they sound amazing, but I haven't quite figured out how to make them sound that amazing. Short strings, long strings. So anyway, I'm boring you. So then I go into solo. I have a lot of solo instruments because I use them a lot. Woodwinds. Look at all those woodwinds. There's way too many things in here. But some of these are from old versions of the template. Trumpets, blah, 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 blah. Going down, trumpets, brass, percussion. So I'm constantly scrolling. Maybe if I had a bigger monitor or something that was, I thought about turning them the other way and having 2 of them. And then at the very bottom, I got little things like atmosphere. And then all my contact instruments live down there. Then, this is really boring, but here you go. So I got all these, the rack.
Sure, the contact instances and stuff. Sure.
And then weirdly, I see all these people with these great, sophisticated, shortcut, little key things. And I got this, I'm just still using the old, you can see it. I'm using an iPad to do, there it is, to do all my volumes and filter stuff. And it's really kind of bare bones and not that sexy or pretty, but that's what I use.
It works. Great.
It works. And I love, when I see people online and they're showing their setup and it's like really beautiful and there's things all over the place. Oh God, I got to get into the real world now. But anyway, it works for me. So
John,
absolutely.
The controller on the iPad, is that Touch OSC, or what are you running on that iPad that's giving you those controls?
Good question. Is it Lemur or
It might be Lemur.
Yeah, I think it's Lemur, and that's my little volume. It's volume, and that's all I really have are volume. I have everything on there. I could do all the functions on there, but I just
mostly volume modulation, that kind of thing.
Volume modulation. That's really it.
Cool.
And then I've got keystrokes on the iPad, just
cool
for record play.
So
but I just do it on my. I'm pretty good with my little trackball, so
that's cool. Well, another participant says he's a guitar player as well and started scoring with Encore and now uses Finale and Sibelius. Recently heard some James Bernard's Hammer horror scores and was very impressed for his capacity to deliver the music without software. Any advice to learn these techniques and readapt them into the modern way using DP? It's like exploring the past work method to improve the modern one and having an extra approach.
Wow, what a great statement. Or I'm not sure there's a question in there, but
I think the question mark points to any advice to learn these techniques and readapt them into the modern way using DP.
Oh gosh.
So this person is clearly writing scores first and wondering about.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm a big I always tell people I think I write better with pencil and paper, and because I've done both for many years. It's a different part of our brains, I guess. I've got this, which I showed Matt. I'm getting the staff pad, trying to make it work, but it's still a little clunky. I'm hopeful for the day when I can write on the pad and it will recognize everything. It's not quite there yet. I'm on a learning curve with it, but maybe that would answer your question that I think that when we get to the point where we can do this, and this has, by the way, it has all the, I don't know if you guys are familiar with staff pad. I'm sure you are. You're all technical people. It has all the libraries in it, the little small versions of the libraries. So someday I hope to be able to sit anywhere on a plane or anything, just do the whole score on this. I don't think I'm there yet, but I know a lot of people love it and are very adept at it. But that question is so tough to answer because it's all about learning how to write music, and there's no shortcut. I wish I could, it's when I got my degree and I was doing this sound, it's a hard thing to do. But when you're a composition student, you'll take Daphne's at Chloe, Ravel, and you'll take the full score and you'll condense it down to 6 lines. And that's hard. But do you learn harmony and counterpoint and orchestration, everything when you do that. I don't know if they're still doing that in a lot of programs. I think they are. If it's a classical music approach in university. But that's a great question. To answer it another way, I think for me, being an orchestrator has helped me greatly, because if you learn orchestration, if you study Rimsky Korsakov, the famous book, or you study Walter Piston. I'm throwing out all these names of books that I wore out cover to cover. You learn over time how to write. And the only drawback to today's times is we've got all these sophisticated libraries and things that we could put one, you hold down one note and it's a whole cue. That's great, but it's not great, because that's not writing music necessarily, is holding down a key. And that's just my opinion. So, a lot of times if I hear music that was written by someone that's a keyboard player, for instance, and I'm a keyboard player too, but if it's sort of blocky all over the place, it's obvious that they don't necessarily know how to write for strings. It's not just this, it's this, and then what's the internal line, what's the thumb line, old expression, thumb line. Thumb line is the line that occurs between the melody and the accompaniment, and that's the thumb line. It's stuff like that. I don't know if, I hope that's being taught. I don't know if it's being taught. I don't teach. I mean, I do some classes here and there, but I don't teach. But anyway, God, that's a long-winded answer to that.
Well, it's not a simple one, either or kind of a question. Do you know the clips window? Are you running the new DP10? Is it DP10? And do you?
No, actually, Matt asked me that. Am I still on 9 right now? So I know we're gonna switch over soon. But you know how it is when you're in the middle of things. I don't want to switch.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you mentioned having
colors or anything.
One machine. Is that a new cheese grater Mac, or what? You have all of the DP stuff running on one machine. What's the machine?
Oh, that's a great question. It's, I think, one of our trash cans. I think we're still using.
Okay, got it.
Cool.
So that's true. He would be on a souped up trash can, with DP9, and it's like you said, it's stable and it's working well. And at some point, you'll find a window where you can maybe upgrade. But
how much time did it take you to feel like you have your own aesthetic and technical palette of tricks?
Well, that's a great question. I guess the bag of tricks developed over the last 30 years. I don't know if there's. I mean, I just do what I think it should be. I say bag of tricks. What I mean is, that's well put. Whatever your aesthetic is, and I have a certain way of doing things, and I have a certain chordal sensibility that I like. But that's a really good question. A little hard to answer. I'm learning every day. I'm going to be doing. I'm so happy to say I'm going to be doing the Home Alone reboot. I'm studying John Williams scores right now, and I'm petrified because it's just, John's such a lovely guy. We talked the other day anyway. I got the chance to talk to John. And so I guess I'd answer that I'm always developing anew. It's interesting. As time goes by, every job I do, I think I'm learning more. For instance, on the Orville, which is that big space battle-y show I do with Seth MacFarlane, I've learned so much during the course of doing that show about writing that kind of music. So I think it's answer it as best I can. It's whatever you're working on at the time, and if you can put in the effort and the time and the study, you can learn anything. And so I've noticed growth in myself even now. It's weird. I'm still learning. It's like I just started. That's the way it feels. It's cool. Like I just started.
That's cool.
I will say some of the things I did as a young guy kind of blew me away. Like, oh God, I don't know if I could do that. Well, it would be different now. Does that make sense? So I did it that way then. I would probably write it differently now. I guess that's, as humans, that's what we do.
When you finish a cue, do you send a MIDI file or a quick scribe score to or for the printed score for musicians?
Yes, when I get an approval on a cue, I will then simply, because I've got the greatest team in the world, I will then in DP, I just go save as, and then I go over to my server, and my Joanne Kane music service has a folder, and I make a folder and a folder for the new project, and I just pop it in there. It's a DP file, literally. And a mix.
And they're opening DP on their end and doing.
They're opening DP, and they have all the platforms, and they have all, so they can open up anything. People send them standard MIDI files. They send them. I'm sure they send them Finale and Sibelius files, or Dorico, or Logic files. Everybody's a little different in that regard, but with my team, I just send them literally once it's approved. I'll send it out, and they just create all the magic, and it gets done. And
so somebody's asked what your keyboard. We know your MIDI controller is the Lemur on the iPad, but what's the keyboard you primarily use for inputting music?
Oh my God! Well, right now it's this kind of old Korg thing. You can see that, and I was using that beautiful Arturia, the white one. Except I break them.
Oh.
I break them all. I'm a guitar player. I pound. That's why I have to tape up my fingers sometimes, because I do things that I shouldn't do. So this Korg is sort of a temporary thing, but it's bulletproof. It's like a live stage MIDI controller thing, and while the other one's getting fixed. So I've used them all, but I tend to break them. So this one is what's there now.
Cool.
But I just literally plan it. I don't. Everything's everything's controlled by the iPad. So I'm just playing and inputting on that keyboard, but that's it. I'm not doing it.
I think I've got through most of the list, but I think there's a number of requests, if it's possible, to hear you crank the wheel on the Apprehension machine.
That would be a great way to wrap. Let's hear that. Thing.
Yeah, it's fun. It's not really mic'd up, but I'm going to just give you a little taste of it. It's so interesting. Okay, so you can. It's all tunable. So I'm cranking the wheel. I don't know about if you can see this. And you go. Those kind of sound lame, but they're really cool when they're all mic'd up. You can bow them. And this one has sympathetic strings, and it's got a pickup. So you can just put the E-bow on it, and it resonates, and it's amazing. And then you've got, mind you, all of this has to be with delay and stuff.
That's great.
And then
I love it, but it's making me apprehensive.
Check this out. This is cool too. And that goes on for quite a while. And then you got the reverb spring, which again, nothing's on, so you really can't hear it the way it should sound. I broke this wooden thing. You're supposed to bow it. All of this you're supposed to bow. But with delay and just some verb, this sounds amazing.
Wow.
And again, it's all tunable. And it is the true story, though. They were going to build 10 of them. It's hilarious. They were going to build 10 of them. And they said, oh, yeah, we'll have yours. I saw this guy, this wonderful composer guy that uses it. And Mark Corvin is his name. He's really talented. And I saw it, and I went, oh, my God, I got to get one of those. So I contacted the guys, and they said, yeah, we'll have one in about 2 months for you. Well, about 8 months later, they finally, sent it. And I've used it on a lot of scores, and it's really cool and fun. But I said, well, when are you going to, another friend of mine wanted one. And I asked them, and I said, well, can you build one for my friend Andy? And they said, well, actually, we don't think we're going to build them anymore. It's too hard to build them. I don't know if there was a fight or something, or it just literally was too difficult to manufacture them. But anyway, but maybe they're doing it now, but that was just at the time.
That thing's fantastic. Thanks for sharing.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Well, John, we're at the end, and we want to let you get back to your busy schedule, but we wanted to thank you very, very much for being here.
My pleasure, and go get them, everybody out there, all you composers.
Okay, let's do this, John, so you can see. Let me go back here and turn you off so we can go into gallery mode so everyone can give you a round of applause. Thank you so much, John.
Gallery mode.
Gallery mode.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day, John, and my best to your family and you, and obviously on all your success. So
thanks, man.
Take care, everybody, and we're going to wrap. See you next time.
See you next time. Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye.